So now I have the pleasure to be somehow the closing session for today. I have a good and a bad news. The good news is I have a lot of pictures. The bad news is I'm terribly nervous. So each time I'm telling the story, I tell it a bit different, but you all have the chance to ask questions afterwards, so let's see. Before telling anything about it, I'm feeling a bit like the strangest animal. I think the Monty Python have said so. Today I'm a computer scientist, and beforehand even. Maybe I'm not the strangest, but one of the strange animals, because I discovered some other computer scientists or related ones. So the question is, how did I arrive here at the Eduworks? And the answer is more or less, I always cared about problems and solutions. Of course, that's like the most general thing I could say, but the thing is, a real solution always involves the human being. Because if I just solve a problem, I solve it into an empty space, and no one would ever use it. So it's like useless. So in my observation, always the human is in the center. So therefore I have that nice motivation area about the human-centered something. And you could see there are two areas. One is the adaptive testing, which is somehow about testing. Of course, we always want to be adaptive, so it's also kind of motivation word, and it's about education. And I found out I should say it's about education, because we had a lot to hear today about the labor market, and I'm fortunately or unfortunately no expert. So I learned a lot today, but I'm certainly not wise about it. So we start with the first colorful slide. We are somehow capturing the labor market educational situation, and we want to have some kind of match. Why do we want to have so? Because today we want to provide a kind of education which is most probably, hopefully, producing the right student for tomorrow's labor market situation. What we are always forgetting a bit in the middle is then that we have a kind of human who is involved. So the human should capture some kind of education to be ready for the market in the end. So the interesting thing for us is if we want to really enable some kind of matching or some kind of services or trust on the stuff we are doing, we should really think about how could we capture the human. And the magic word is here certainly profiling. And this is always somehow about knowledge. We also learned today knowledge is always a hot topic. I will use it influential. I will use it a lot today. So I want to say it always has a motivation part, knowledge. We all want to gain knowledge. We all have the vision to have knowledge in our projects. But in my case here, of course, I also have the vision, but I want to have something which could be formalized. So I would limit it to say, I want to have the knowledge which I could somehow formalize and put into the use. Because I'm a tool person, and we see in the end there should be the outcome some kind of tool, which is based on some research. There are two other areas. It's the culture and the cognitive type. We somehow met them today, and I put them in here, and you will like that word because I will now say context. The user is always available in some kind of context. We heard it from that end of the table today. So if you want to really capture the user, we want to capture it in a kind of context, which could be, for example, a cognitive type. Whatever it is, could be the learning style. We had it in the discussions on how is the user learning on the education. So it gives us an additional input on it. I always like to say in research, we are standing on the top of the shoulders of giants. So there's a lot of research which happened actually before us. And the trick is to find something else while standing on the previous researcher. And so I want to start with something which already is in existence. We heard it's about testing. How do we test? Mostly in the educational situation, we have some kind of dry, static test which is lying in front of the student, and he has to fill it. And we somehow hope that the test is capturing what we are asking for, and in the end will show how the student is, how he's performing. And there's some area which is called the area of adaptive testing, which I more or less want to extend with my concept in the end. And there are two beautiful words in it. The one direction is the ability of the user, and the other word is the difficulty. And I know especially the word of ability most people will hate me to put it into the slides because what is ability? It could be like anything. But in the context of adaptive testing, they mean it's some kind of inner power to perform on a certain task. And of course, we all know if someone is really good at something and we ask him about it, then based on the answer, we could maybe not judge, is he really performing good or bad, because there's always an error involved. And the error is not on the page, but inside of the theory it is, and we all have it in our head that is present. We want to match it to some kind of difficulty. The difficulty is here connected to the questions. So we are talking about some kind of online testing. Gabor is not in because it's terribly connected to the OntoHR. Why is it connected to the OntoHR? Because it's connected to the studio approach of Corino, and it's some kind of fruit of previous projects, which is also the enabler for the MetaSys project. So there are another giant, which on top I'm hopefully standing and not falling, and this is producing this. What is it all about? The items, the questions have some kind of difficulty, and the idea is if we grasp how in an average the user is answering the question, we could say that the difficulty level is somehow picturing the ability level, including a certain error. And you see that kind of methodology, so we start with some kind of easy question, and if he answers right, we go to the next more difficult question, and if he answers wrong, we go down, and over time it should be achieved to some kind of level. So we should say, oh, it's already sound nice. But the problem is still the same. We're asking about one knowledge area, one kind of knowledge dimension. The question is he a computer scientist? Is he a system administrator? And in the end, you will have an answer like yes, or in the better way, you have an answer like he is performing like this and that on it. But the like is not captured. It's also only some kind of quality level, which is because in the OntoHR, the test includes some kind of intelligence to do even more on top. So the question is, how could we break out of this cage? And this is more or less repicturing the structure. You see here are some nodes, and they are connected to questions. So we have a very boring plane, and we still have the linear question. And we want to think, how could we involve some kind of context into it to capture more about the user? And you see, we already have some kind of additional information if you really have a look on it. The green points are marking the right answers, the red points are marking the not so right answers, and the blue ones are the answers, the questions which we haven't asked. So these are like a database of potential questions. There's always the items. There could be 100, could be 1,000, or even thousands, and we want to do something with it. So what we need is some kind of structure to it to get to the next level of our experience. So we are earning our first research questions about it. So how are we able to grasp the user knowledge in the best possible way? This is already the overkill question because I'm asking the whole area, but I mean it in the way of how to formalize it on the test to grasp more about the knowledge of the user. So it's more about how to detect the understanding of an area. So that's more capturing the user with his knowledge in a context. And then we have the burning question, how could we add context to it? And we are returning to that picture because it has the pleasure to be a bit simple. And you see, if we rethink about it, then the questions most likely will have something in common, which is like a knowledge area. So if I'm the system administrator, I have to know, for example, about networks, about software, hardware, this and that. So these groups, these areas are like knowledge areas. And of course, we also have some kind of relations between them. So perhaps the system administrator, he has to know about software, and he should know about hardware, but there are certainly some stuff which is more important. So we could express like, this depends on this depends on that, and so on. Why we are going into, of course, we could have some kind of context on it, so we could label the questions additionally. So this is like the world we are swimming right now. But the question is, how could we now formalize it? Because the target were to somehow formalize the knowledge. And the solution we're taking already in the studio approach, and we are now going one step further. The solution is we're starting with ontologies. why do we use ontologies? Of course, it's a current buzzword, love situation, so it's very likely that we want to have it, but it also has some other appeals because it's heavily structuring an area. It's as well capturing the content, and we have the ability to formulate or formalize relations. I say it now, I won't show it on the picture because I think it's outside of the frame right now. But we should keep in mind there is this ontology and we have the ability to store the knowledge in relation, which we already did. So you could see if you're now going for the next page, we have that nice knowledge cake, or it's the adaptive testing cake, and we go in layers and we have the sublayer, which is the ontology. So there we have our crazy structure and the relations and the content we are saving about it. In the bigger frame, it's called the educational domain. That's really what is working below the studio. So it's capturing the educational areas which are available at the university. So you have knowledge management in it, or whatever classes you could have. And we as well structure that certain area is dependent on this and that. So this is like the basement we are building on top. And then if you go higher, we could imagine maybe we don't always want to have the whole ontology, but only a subset. So there's a kind of grouping. So the system administrator is maybe some kind of branch of the whole ontology, but that's not so important. But the next level is like the questions. So to a knowledge area, there are the questions connected. So I have the system administrator, which is one area with a lot of sub-areas, but it could connect to a lot of questions. So I could ask him 30 questions to being a system administrator before going anywhere else. Still the question is, why do we have a look at it? We have seen there is an adaptive testing, and it has the notion of some kind of difficulty. And with this concept, the OntoHR concept already break free out of this old structure. But nevertheless, it has an appeal because it's somehow picturing the user. And when we are testing, we could say, if we have an educational domain and we have to have captured it somehow, structured it, then finding the user is more or less exploring the educational domain with our test questions. So we are somehow moving. So we decide we ask him this, and if he answers in the right way, we want to move to another direction. And to decide that, we need some kind of measure. We want to measure the user, how is he doing? One is the difficulty, which is maybe easier to understand. But we also could have some kind of feedback from the ontology directly, some kind of complexity measures. Because if you transform the ontology, it's like a graph. So we are looking at a big taxonomy, which has a certain degree of connectiveness. And we could certainly say that an area which has more connections is more complex, and which is most probably more difficulty. And the hot question is, building on the, I would not say an old, but novel system which we already have, adding the notion of the adaptive testing, which we also have, putting a bit of context to it in this meta level, and finding a good way to somehow judge the complexity, it pictures it to a problem of combining measures. So if we find the right way to put together the measures, we could make use of the knowledge stored indirectly in the structure of the educational domain, and by the behavior on the user in front of the system answering the question, we could track how he's related to the knowledge areas. And I don't know, how's the time?
4 minutes.
4 minutes. So, now I introduced maybe a lot. It's computer science, it involves some kind of measures in some virtual space. But we all know if we have measures and we want to search for something, we have to have a strategy. So we have to have some kind of algorithm to choose where we are going in the structure. You could imagine it, you are on a big place, like a big garden at a castle. You always have to decide, do I go left or right? And we want to give this job actually to the computer. So if you want to give it there, we need some kind of strategy, some kind of engine. Out of the expert systems, we know always there's some mystery entity which is called the inference engine. It makes inference on the available material. So it has some kind of rules to derive if I'm here and I want to go somewhere and I have some inputs, which could be parameters, maybe the performance on the test or something else. Based on that, we could decide how to move and how to trigger the next rule. Trigger the next rule in this context is how to go to the next area. And, okay. We skipped that because it's more or less only saying we want to explore the user on the educational domain, which I already said. Coming to the conclusive picture where I wanted to go. Now you see a lot of colorful things. After I talked about a lot of colorful stuff. And I don't want to say the word, but maybe some of you will already get that structure. We could imagine we have some kind of feedback of the system, which is answered right, answered wrong, circumstances of the test, parameters, knowledge about the user, background, whatever. And we could picture it as a source stream of data passing through our system. And on top, we have some kind of hopefully intelligent test engine, which is making the decision how to perform the test further. And because it's always hard, you have a stream of data. We know the big data problem is all about having too much data to do anything. So we do have to do some kind of filtering. So there's a lot of stuff happening. But we see here there's a notion of an event. What is an event? Event is something has happened in the data which we know and could identify. So for example, if the user says, gives a right answer to something, then it's firstly a right answer. But in the end, the event is right answer. So right answer could be an event, and it could be captured by an agent. For example, the agent is the next level, so we could have a lot of events like he did it in 10 seconds. He did it in this kind of context. He did right, he did wrong. How did he wrong? Maybe a learning type which we have in background. So there are a lot of events. And on top, you have a consumer, which is correlating the events. 1 minute. Okay, which is correlating the events and hopefully giving us the feedback for the test engine to re-perform the test. That's more or less about the topic. I think I even have another slide. You see the research questions, the second one. So we could be sure this will introduce a lot of problems. The good news is behind there's a lot of stuff which we already know. So for example, the picture I've shown is something which is called the event processing. So it's an industrial kind of industrial near standard. The ontology we know about the measures, but we just have to find the right combination. And if we have some kind of data fundament with it, with these new measures, hopefully, we could continue and think about how to change our strategy of testing. This could also include like, now I'm testing on this knowledge area, but I discovered you most probably will have this knowledge style, this working style. So now I'm asking you 2 completely unrelated questions, but in the back of the system, it's improving the area of the learning style, and in the end we could check mark, he's an analyst, and then we could completely improve how the system is working, because it will change how we would feedback the questions to the user. And with this, I want to finish.
Could you generate surveys from your database?
Please again.
Could you generate surveys from your database?
That's a very good question. Because, yes, there are a lot of questions in it, but the question is how they are related. So first we have to connect them to the knowledge areas. So you have to say, give me some kind of feedback on this, and then we could maybe start working. But the bottleneck is the questions are targeted on education. So it asks you, how do you have an idea about this and that? So maybe for the purpose of survey to really directly capture the user, the questions are not appropriate. But if you fill in the right questions, it's maybe possible, yes.
So you want to ask? I suppose someone was...
Just want to say that no. You cannot generate questions.
I want to ask a kind of old-fashioned but still alive question in the domain of knowledge-based systems. How do you generate these rules that you specify? And is there any plan that your idea is to develop a system that by itself it produces some rules or not? Because the role of rules for me is not that clear.
Yes.
How you want to manage it? So.
I brought in the word of rules, yes. So I'm guilty. But in the end, most of the system isn't involving rules. First hand, you have the ontology. And to the ontology, like for a database, you could ask questions like, give me a question with this and that parameters, or give it in this and that context if you formulate how the context. So you could easily answer. You don't need a rule, you directly get an answer. So the rules are mostly about that strategies. And in this regards, this test engine is very similar to an inference engine. So yes, you're right. Inside of it, there has to be a set of rules. And you have the core rules, which are capturing the main testing, so what it's actually doing. And we certainly have to have some kind of rules to capture how we modify the testing. Because we have that main line of testing. We want to test, is he a system administrator? We want to know more, yes, of course. But we have to be sure that we all the time return to the main track and not get lost somewhere.
But you use some sort of feedback to maintain these rules, or those are to some extent fixed?
I would fix it in these regards. Because the questions are on the measures, then on, let's say, the model, how to actually do the strategies, and maybe later on we could think about modifying, but for the outcome, it's the best to fix them. And then argue we did the right in this and that rules.
So that's
Preset rules.
Could the system adapt to different learning styles as well?
Could be.
It just seems to me that the questions are all the same, they're testing out different levels of knowledge. But could it be adapted to different learning styles of students as well? Or the question style would be different?
Yes. And you said it was the last word. You could modify the questions. So you could have some kind of redundant question. So you have two questions asking the same thing, but they are connected to the learning styles. So one is more capturing the general thing, one is more the analytical thing. And by the performance on it, you could then get feedback. And it's fueled by certain types of questions. Normally you have yes and no questions. But you also could have yes, some no, and they could connect to a bit right, totally wrong, and something like that. So in this movement area, you'll be able to judge on the learning style. If someone defines the model, because it's not my task to have the learning style. It's only appealing to tell the story of the context.
Is it so? The way you want to establish the item difficulties, do you want to use item response theory?
That is still hypothetical.
That's a good question. Of course, the first thing I stumble upon is the item response theory, and it's very likely to fit. But it's somehow, yes, of course, it's a proven solution, so it would be appealing to use it, and I would like to use it. But there's a bottleneck. The bottleneck is the target of our system. Because if you think it through, you will find out that there's one really appealing direction, which is I could cut out a new test out of the ontology without any difficulties, just based on the complexity. So in this point, we don't have difficulties. And they could also be related to the knowledge area. So if you have the test in this vision, the difficulty is right. But if you have it in the other, maybe the question is easy, because it's easier to answer for a system administrator. So it could be that there's a great conflict which will prevent us. And normally it's solved by not compilation, but calibration. It's solved by calibrating let's say, the knowledge base of items. But I think it's not possible in our frame to do it.